Okay, today, excuse me just a second here. I have a pastor friend in California who's sending me text messages like I got nothing else to do. And so, um, so today, I early in the week I was going to call this World War 2.5, because last week I did Delusion 2.0. But this way, so we interrupt this update because things changed a lot this week. Did it seem like a lot of things happened this week to you? And people suggested that I could go for a long time, and I'm really going to try to keep within the regular time frame, because we have volunteers and everything, and people with kids and all that other stuff. So I'm going to try to cover some of the events of this week. But I want to start off with a bit of an introduction. As you know, we always talk about the convergence of events and how things seem to be happening very quickly as we move forward closer to what I think are clearly the end times. People, as I've noted in the secular press, have noted this is foreign policy from a few years ago, a world disrupted, and it certainly seemed like that this week, in case you didn't notice. And I will just, if I could just say at the beginning, if the world leaders, want to do stuff during the week, if you could kind of wrap it up by Thursday night so I can get everything. I mean, I don't want to, it's not all about me, but come on, be a little, I'm on the golf course, and Trump's getting, I'm driving home and, now that's when I hear on Friday when the things started happening in Syria. And it was a stressful week. I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen. And a lot of people said we've not seen anything like this since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I agree with that. It was very tense. And I think it's an indicator that you need to prepare for your personal lives. Because we don't know what's going to happen before when we're exiting. Nobody knows when you exit this life, whether it's by death or by the rapture, and you need to always be ready. And you may be around for a while, and you should prepare that things are going to get worse. And I will confess to you, I was very concerned. But let me start off with this. Take heed. This is Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, one of the great end time passages. It's the longest discourse, message, talk that Jesus gave, Matthew's 24 and 25. There are also somewhat parallel passages, although I think there were really two different times when you look at Mark and also Luke chapter 21. But they cover a lot of the same topics. But they don't always cover exactly the same thing. That's why I think they were two different talks. But this is the characteristic of what Jesus said. Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And then shall many be offended, verse 10, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another, and many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And there are other passages in that Matthew chapter 24 and elsewhere where we are warned about deception. And I will confess to you that this week, the concern that I have about where all of this is going has never been stronger in terms of deception. Every time something happens in the world now, what is the immediate refrain? False flag, it's fake, it's staged, it didn't happen. Now listen, folks, these things really do happen. Not everything is staged, but and people are fighting like, oh, you believe that Assad did this, or you believe that he didn't. You're a fool, and it's insane. And a lot of this is going on in the Christian community, and I'm concerned about it because I think people are being deceived, and I will tell you up front, with regard to the chemical attack that occurred about a week ago in Syria, oh, let me say, just so I don't want any negative, nasty comments on the YouTube channel, you will be deleted and blocked with pleasure if you do that. What is a claim chemical attack? Now, first of all, I don't know who, I think something happened. I don't know who did it. But I want to walk through a bit of an analysis because the people at the heart of this on all sides, I believe, are deceivers. And it makes it very, very difficult to figure out exactly what went on. But let me just set it up this way. I believe we live in the end times. Jesus warned us to be careful about deception more than he warned us about anything else in the end times. I believe that, and we know from other passages in the New Testament, in the Gospels, that Satan and his demons understand eschatology. Remember when Jesus was getting ready to cast demons out, what was the question that they asked him? Wait a minute, are you come to what? Torment us before our time? They knew that they were like, we read it, we read the book, this isn't the right time. And so understand that Satan uses deception. And he uses it on many levels. So I'm just going to, I want you to keep that in mind as kind of a framework. And because I think Satan has created religions, movements, political movements, geopolitical movements, all in an effort to deceive us. And it means all of us. I mean, Paul warned about deception all the time. Jude, all of the epistles warn about deception. So we need to be very careful. So let me just sort of put it in sort of a framework. I'll start off with this. A guy named Jack on Twitter said this, great read, and he referred to this post by Ev Williams. Interesting take, why there's no bipartisan way forward at this juncture in our history. One side must win. Now, who's Jack? Well, Jack is the head of the CEO of Twitter. That's why he got the single name Jack, @Jack. You know, like I don't get @John because I don't work for Twitter. But, and you remember Mark Zuckerberg, I don't even have any video clips of that. Did he look like a robot? I mean, really, did he? I mean, he didn't look like he makes normal human connections. And he's all about social connections, his company. But I think he did a pathetic job in testifying in front of the Senate and the House. But one of the things he mentioned in there was, Senator, you really just don't get it. I think I'm quoting him correctly or paraphrasing him correctly, is that it's a pretty left-wing place out here in Silicon Valley. And it is. I mean, look, we all know this. And so there is this attempt by these people to control our thoughts. When Mike Pompeo, and I don't have this clip either. In fact, I don't have any audio clips this week except one little one. And it's nobody talking in that one, interestingly enough. So I'm going to try to, because there's a whole bunch of these things that are going on. Mike Pompeo, the current head of the CIA, a nominee for Secretary of State, went before the Senate for his confirmation hearings this week. And Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, used to be the mayor of Newark, was asking him a question. Now, Mike Pompeo in the past, he is a Christian. He believes in the end times. He believes in the rapture. And he also has conventional, traditional Christian views on same-sex marriage and homosexuality. And so Cory Booker was there and asking him questions like, do you still believe in same-sex marriage? Or are you still against same-sex marriage? To which Pompeo replied, well, this is what I've said in the past, but I've never discriminated against anybody. And then Cory Booker's like, we don't care about that. Do you believe in same-sex marriage is essentially what he was saying. Do you believe that there shouldn't be moral standards? Because you see, Cory Booker is become a crazed leftist in my view. And leftists always lie. And they don't care about what you think. They want to force you to believe the way that they are. They are totalitarians. And this is what's playing into this whole end time scenario, is this leftism. And most people don't realize that it's happening. And Zuckerberg goes there, and trust me, he was like, well, did you ban Diamond and Silk from Facebook? Well, we're looking into that. We may have made a mistake. Translation of that, we got caught. And the light of truth was shined on what we did. Because he doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what you believe, because he wants you to believe what he believes. And he has a worldview, he has a religious system, and he is as narrow-minded and totalitarian in his far more than any Christian is. And there are other religions in the world today that follow this. And so now here is the CEO of Twitter, also out in Silicon Valley, saying, hey, here's a great article that you should read by Ev Williams. And Ev Williams puts it up, why there is no bipartisan way forward at this juncture in our history. One side must win. So when people like a conservative like Dennis Prager says, we're in a civil war, people laugh at him. You're a fool, Dennis. You're making it up. Fake news, Dennis. But here's the CEO of Twitter who is shadow banning people. In other words, say a conservative, their posts won't be seen by their followers because they're being shadow banned. Because these totalitarian, fascist, socialist leftists don't want you to hear an alternative viewpoint. And now this one comes out, the CEO of Twitter, a multi-billionaire, comes out and says, hey, I agree with this article. The Great Lesson, and here it is, the title of it, The Great Lesson of California in America's New Civil War. California is the future. Now, I also read this week that they want to split California into 3 parts, which I think is, didn't Caesar do that with Gaul? All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. I remember that from Latin class in high school. I don't remember the Latin phrase, but I do remember that was one of the first things we learned. Also, I came, I saw, I conquered. But listen to what it says. This comes from this publication that the head of Twitter thinks is great. In the early 2000s, California faced a similar situation to the one America faces today. Its state politics were severely polarized, and state government was largely paralyzed. The Republican Party was trapped in the brain-dead orthodoxies of an ideology stuck in the past. Does that sound like somebody who's fair and balanced? The party was controlled by zealous activists and corrupt special interests who refused to face up to the reality of the new century. It was a party that refused to work with the Democrats in good faith or compromise in any way. Listen, this is what you need to know about leftists. The other thing, not only do they lie, they project. All of the bad things that they are, they project onto people that don't agree with them. The solution for the people of California was to reconfigure the political landscape and shift a supermajority of citizens, and by extension their elected officials, under the Democratic Party's big tent. How did they do that? Well, why don't we bring in a bunch of people that would share our values and vote for us? The natural continuum of more progressive to more moderate solutions then got worked out within the context of the only remaining functioning party. And so this is the way forward. Be like California, which in the latest survey I saw said that the quality of life is worse in California than anywhere else, despite the great weather and beaches and mountains and everything else you want. This was introduced into the California Senate just in February, introduced by Senator Pan, and he's a radical leftist. And then it said this bill would require any person who operates a social media as defined internet website with a physical presence in California. Now, how many websites do you think that would cover? Probably just about all of them. With a presence in California, to develop a strategic plan to verify news stories shared on its website. The bill would require the plan to include, among other things, a plan to mitigate the spread of false information through news stories, the utilization of fact checkers to verify news stories, providing outreach for the social media users, and placing a warning on a news story containing false information. Now, this is already what Facebook is doing. There is a warning that comes with postings from Twitter. For postings from Breitbart, excuse me. Breitbart is a conspiracy thing, and it's fake, and it hangs out. The wrong kind of people hang out on Breitbart, or what? I don't know exactly what the wording is, but you can imagine. You know what they're thinking when they put it on there. And what is this? You know what I would call this bill? I don't know if it has a name. I would call it the Facebook Protection Act. Why? Because it's expensive to hire fact checkers and all this stuff. And so what they're trying to do is, hey, Facebook is controlling everything. We like what Facebook is doing, so we're going to continue to support them here. I'm very concerned where this is going. Notice I haven't even really talked about Syria yet. Because you need to understand the context of all of these different things that are converging. And deception, delusion is at the top of the pile. What's this about? Censored, Sweden. This is a series of posts of Sweden's war on free speech from the Gatestone Institute. Look at what some of this says. Great post by Judith Bergman, who's been following what's going on in Sweden. According to the Swedish mainstream media, the country has experienced a significant rise in prosecutions for hate speech on social media last year. The organization to believe largely responsible for this is a website translation is the Web Hate Investigator, a private organization founded in January 2017 by a former police officer who has taken upon himself to identify and report to the authorities Swedish individuals whom he and his organization decide are committing thought crimes and inciting hatred. Most of the people identified and reported by the organization were middle-aged and elderly ladies. The average age is around 55 years. Young women also almost do not appear at all. Why? Probably because they got with the program. They've been indoctrinated not to do this. The guy that started this was committing cruelty to animals. And so he fled. He was going to be charged. He fled Sweden, and he stayed away till the statute of limitations ran. Then he came back, and he's getting government funding to run this Web Hate Investigator website. Fact checker. And old ladies, 60, 70-year-old ladies, are being charged with hate crimes in Sweden. Now, what is the basis of their charge? They are posting about a particular religion and the problems associated with that religion. Does anybody want to guess what it is? I won't name it because, I suppose I could be charged in Sweden. Here is what a lady said. She said, this is her post. I think she put it on Facebook. A biological sensation in Sweden, a new bird species, Parasitus muslimus, has established itself here. In recent years, the Arab bird has been widely spread in Northern Europe, largely because it lacks natural enemies here. The female has a rather comprehensive feather shield where only the eyes are visible. The male usually has 4 females. The species is a migratory bird. but with the weird feature, they never moved back. Another woman, age 65, was charged with inciting hatred against an ethnic group for writing on Facebook, "If this continues, the intelligence in Sweden will be at goldfish level. Refuse all that has to do with a particular religion." She denies having written those statements, but insists that she wishes to warn Swedes against this. According to news reports, in 2016, she was assaulted by 4 so-called unaccompanied minors and knocked unconscious, an act that has impaired her memory. No one was sentenced for that assault, but she now faces financial ruin, difficulties, and cannot pay her rent. She receives no help from the Swedish state. So far, Christina has reportedly been interrogated 6 times for up to 2 hours each time for her alleged thought crimes. Ask about her childhood and whether she was doing drugs. She has no criminal record. She said this: "It is terrible to feel like a dangerous criminal because you write the truth about what's happening in our society while rape is high and criminals go free." It was somebody from this former police officer's website who reported her. She risked being fined or going to jail. Another 71-year-old pensioner is currently on trial for incitement to hatred for asking this question in a Facebook post. They want to send this person to prison. Do you understand how serious this is? Do you understand how far down the road we have gone? The question was this: one can criticize fascism or Nazism, but why not Islam? Why should Islam have any protection status? And they want to send her to prison for that. This is what's coming, my friends. Buck up, gear up, prepare. Prepare your hearts and minds for the assault that is going to be coming on your mind. It is very, very serious. It is exactly what the Lord Jesus Christ warned about shortly before his crucifixion. I don't know that I could impress it on anymore. So let's talk about geopolitics. And I shouldn't apologize, but I will. I've tried to put this into a coherent order. I have some things from the scriptures I want to share with you at the end as to what the events of this week I think are not fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but a foreshadow of Bible prophecy. So if you can stick with us to the end. And listen, this religion that we were talking about, it's a problem. Now, look, I don't advocate going and killing everybody that belongs to that religion. There are decent people that belong to that. They've been raised in that culture. They need the gospel is what they need. I have a friend on his way right now to Syria, Iraq. If you want to message me on Facebook or send a message through, I'll get you a place where you can contribute to his PayPal. He goes and shares the gospel with Muslims, with Kurds, and they give them money. They go to refugee camps. Praise the Lord for guys like that have the courage to do this. Another guy that does this is Dalton Thomas. And well, Satan, I think, created this religion in part to deceive people. And now we see leftists in this religion uniting against us. And I have an article I want you to read. I'll put it up here in a minute. And Brian, I sent you the website link for a blog post that just went up yesterday by a conservative Zionist that pretty much sums up what I've thought for a long time about where all this is going and where it's coming from. So here we see this. Russia aiding Iran, Axis prepare for war with Israel. Russia's aiding Iran, Axis prepare for war with Israel. This was from last Sunday in Aretz Shiva. Hezbollah has now built a new defense line against an IDF invasion of southern Lebanon by turning hills into long terraces with huge boulders which are meant to serve as traps for Israel's Merkava tank in the next war. They're preparing for war. Why? Because we know war is coming. There are a number of wars prophesied in Scripture. This is from yesterday's Wall Street Journal. They have a review section on Saturday, and so they have a big article on page 1 and 3 of section C, if you want to try to find it. And it's titled, The Necessary Injustice of Partition. And it's a post put up, and it's interesting the timing of this. I don't think there's any mistake on the timing. This was also Holocaust Remembrance Week in Israel. To remember what happened 75 years ago, roughly. Because we all remember it, right? Everybody remembers the Holocaust. Well, just wait till you see this. And so he talks in this article about, we've had this dream of coming back to Israel, the Jews, for all this time, and it's our land, but there are other people who are claiming this land, and I'm not so sure they have, the historical basis for their claims that we do. And so I did some research on this, and there's a number of clans that came back that now call themselves Palestinians. And in part of my research, I came across this protest, which occurred in 1920. Now, in 1920, this area was referred to by a guy we know as the Hajj Aman el-Husseini. He was the Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was appointed by Allenby as the British were pulling back he's the most important Islamic holy man in the Holy Land. There is pretty good evidence, I think, that he is the uncle or cousin of a guy that we knew as Yasser Arafat, an Egyptian, by the way. He referred to the area back in 1920. He called it Palestine, right? Do you think he called it Palestine? He called it southern Syria. And so at this protest, by the way, in 1920, these are Arabs protesting the Jews immigrating to Israel, what is now Israel. And there are two signs there. The sign on the left says, "We resist the Jewish immigration." The sign on the right says, "Palestine is part of Syria." And when they talked about the king of Syria at the time, it was, "Long live the king. That's our king." There was no Palestinian dream there. Until the Jews became established, then they wanted the land. That's the Hajj Aman al-Husseini. I could show you who he went to, very famous leader in Europe that he went to meet with to figure out how to get rid of the Jews. You can guess who that is. People have put that on Facebook. The guy in Germany put the picture, the historical picture. It's all over the internet on his Facebook page, and he was charged with a crime in Germany, where they should know better because of what happened in Germany. Let's see if I have any more here. Hang on. In 1919, Al-Aref edited a Jerusalem-based publication called Southern Syria. At the 1920 riots, Hajj Aman al-Husseini held up a portrait of King Faisal of Syria and showed it to the Jerusalem Arab crowd. "This is your king." The crowd responded, "God save the king." The focus on much of the protest at the time was on the imposed separation of British Mandatory Palestine from Syria, which came under a French mandate. The goal was reunification, not Palestinian independence. This report came out, reported in the Washington Post and the New York Times both. Holocaust Remembrance Day. What's the headline from the Washington Post at the top? "It is like we have regressed 100 years. Report warns of resurgent global anti-Semitism." New York Times headline, "Holocaust is fading from memory," survey finds. And they found out that 2/3 of millennials could not tell them what Auschwitz was. What is the old saying? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, right? Is it prophesied in Scripture that there will be a worldwide outpouring of hatred towards the Jews in the end times? The answer is unmistakably yes. Now, I personally want to fight against that mentality. And I have to tell you, I see a lot of Christians. "Oh, all this happening in Syria, that's the Jews, that's the Jewish bankers that control everything in the world." This is from the publisher of the survey. There were over 40,000 camps and ghettos during the Holocaust. 49% of millennials cannot name a single one. 66% don't know Auschwitz. In the Washington Examiner this week, a report, well, I guess it was last week, Israel may be facing a 5-front war. One of the things that this article relates is a website set up by the government of Iran, the first international hourglass festival, claiming in Declaration of Quds, Jerusalem, as the capital city of Zionist regime demonstrates their weakness and inability. That's quoting Ayatollah Khamenei. This is on their the Twitter page about the hourglass. What's going through the hourglass? The Star of David. Why? Time is running out for the Jews. This report I saw, the Iranian dream of a reborn Persian Empire. This is what they want to control. This is from the New York Post a few years ago. You think, has it changed at all since February of 2015 when this article first appeared? No, it's more now. Syria, Iran military props up client Bashar al-Assad. Lebanon, Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah killed 2 Israeli soldiers on the border last week. Iraq, Baghdad's Shia-dominated government relies on Iran's backing. Yemen, Iran-backed Shia tribes called the Houthis overthrew the government last month. Western Afghanistan, Iran's influence expands as U.S. presence fades. Is there any reason why Israel is facing all of these war on all these different fronts? Now, there's a lot of criticism of Israel. I've heard, well, they just want to expand their borders. You know, they took over the Golan Heights. They want to take over all of Syria. They want to take over Lebanon. Now, I don't, this is a tank exercise in the Golan Heights, in the Syria region, the border region of the Golan. Israel is concerned, and they proposed expanding the buffer zones. Now, is it significant or not? Let's see. This is what happened this week. If you've been to the Golan Heights, you stand there and you overlook at the Kenitra, what they call the Kenitra crossing, you overlook the demilitarized zone. Now, when we were there in 2011, we saw UN vehicles and white helmet people moving through that zone. This year, we drove up there on our own, and I drove down a road I shouldn't have driven down, and all of a sudden I saw a gate and a rusty UN sign, and I figured that's probably not a good sign that I'm seeing that. So we turned around and left. But we could have driven well into that DMZ because why? Because the UN is effectively withdrawn from that. And this week, Assad moved tanks and other military equipment into the demilitarized zone under the guise I'm going to be fighting militants and stuff in this area. And there is a conclave of ISIS-controlled area there right along the southern part of the Golan Heights, just north of Jordan. It would be in, let's see here, in this area right down here. This is the Sea of Galilee. So in this area right here, this is, when you look at the maps, it's ISIS-controlled. So Assad's moving on into this area that Israel has said is kind of, you better not move into there or we're going to do something. They're being provoked. Here's a good, this is better. So this area, this is Jordan border right here, and this is the Golan Heights. So it's right in this area that ISIS controls it. And then the Syrian civil war started about 30 miles to the east of the southern edge of the southern part of the Sea of Galilee in Dara. So this is significant. Does it fulfill Bible prophecy? No. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is not so much that there's been a fulfillment, and I was concerned a little bit because, as soon as President Trump tweeted, there were all these YouTube videos and blog posts and Facebook posts. Armageddon is starting, World War III is starting, and people jump ahead, get too far ahead of the facts. But was I concerned? Sure, I was concerned. Did I take steps? Yeah, we took some steps. So what started this all off was this gas attack that occurred. 30, 40 women and children, I hear 30 or 40 people died. And there's all this dispute about we didn't do it. Now, I will note for the record that before this happened, Syria and Russia were saying there's going to be a gas attack, there's going to be a gas attack, but it's going to be done, it's not going to be done by us, it's not going to be done by us. Now, are they prophets or are they trying to cover themselves in advance? And a lot of people believe them. And frankly, I don't believe much of anything that Vladimir Putin says. If he said today it's raining and cloudy, I'm going to go outside and check. I mean, at the height of the Cold War, there were 1 million people employed to deceive the West. Go read Diana West's American Betrayal book and talk about how they were brought into our schools and institutions and government to deceive us. And so now we have 2/3 of millennials that can't tell you what Auschwitz is. I think they succeeded. I mean, how long would it take to turn it around if you could turn it around? I don't know. So the response of Israel, now Israel has really not really, I don't think, officially come out. They've expressed concerns about the gas attack. But what they did was they went up to the T4 base, which is in central Syria, to the east of the town of Homs, and they bombed this military base. They targeted it because there was something going on at that base. And I don't know exactly what was going on in that base. I suspect that you kind of have to piece things together. So we get the announcement that, well, Israel's never admitted attacking the base. But the U.S. didn't do it. There's no indication that the U.S. did it. Syria came out immediately and said, well, that's the U.S. doing it. And we said, no, we didn't. And then the news kind of filtered out that Israel had done it. And in a departure from their usual procedure, they told the U.S. about it, but they didn't tell Russia about it. And they attacked the base, I think with missiles shot from jets. So a lot of destruction. Reports are that there were maybe somewhere in the order of 10 Iranians killed at the facility. The other announcement that came out shortly thereafter was that the drone that we talked about a couple weeks ago, that it entered Israeli airspace from Syria, was armed with explosives. It wasn't just a reconnaissance craft. It was there to engage in a terrorist attack and send a message. And it was traced, I believe I'm correct on this, but if I'm wrong, I'm sure you'll let me know, that they attacked this airbase in response to the drone, the same one that they attacked this week, because they had more intel as to what was going on there. So they attacked that site. Iran has responded. I don't even remember when this was. Israeli cities to flatten in case of attack on Hezbollah, Iranian cleric warns. Here's a picture of some of the destruction that occurred from the attack on the T4 airbase. Now, the hot topic of discussion is, did Assad do this chemical attack? Why would he do it? What possible good could come from Assad doing this attack? And Assad loves Christians, and he's nice to Christians, and, we would rather have him back than have ISIS run the place. And if I lived there, I would agree with it too. So my response to those questions is, Assad has no motive for doing this. You can go to city after city, town after town, village after village, through Syria, parts of Syria, through the Sunni parts of Syria to be more specific, and you will see this. And so the only question I would ask is, who did that? Who has the air ability and helicopters to drop barrel bombs and destroy block after block after block, city after city, town after town? The Syrian government does. The rebels, as far as I know, don't have an air force. This is not done by shelling. This is done by heavy from-the-air bombardment. And so my only question is, and whether Assad thought he had a reason to do it or not, I mean, look, he wants to keep his country together. He's the head of a country, so it's a war. I mean, there's no doubt about it. What the old say, all's fair in love and war, right? But I'm just saying, is the guy who did that capable of gassing civilians? I mean, is it just a possibility? Are you even willing to consider it? Or do you take Vladimir Putin at his word? We had nothing to do with it. I mean, I could go for hours showing you pictures and drone footage of this destruction in Syria. So I'm going to suggest to you this article from Defense One that I found this week. The logic of Assad's brutality. Now, by the way, the editorial cartoon picture on the right was not part of the article. It's one that I found, and I think it kind of, you need an Iranian flag, an IV bag with Iranian flag on it, or Iranian colors too, in addition to the ones there. I mean, look at what's happened in Syria. This is Aleppo in 2012, 6 years ago. These are night pictures. This is Aleppo last year. What happened to Aleppo? Well, there's people, listen, General Breedlove, who was the Supreme Commander of NATO, back, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, I played a clip of him. in my update, and he said, look, what it looks to us is they were bombing these cities to get people to leave. What happened? The Sunnis left. Where did they go? In large part, Europe. And so what's the result of that? Now we have speech codes and hate crime, little old ladies being put in jail, threatened with jail, interrogated for hours over 6 different times because they criticize the people who've ended up in Sweden or elsewhere. Here is, this is Damascus. And what you'll find if you go there and you look at these areas is these were Sunni areas. Assad he's an Alawite, I think more largely secular, but in that culture, he's an Alawite. And they had a Sunni problem. They wanted to get rid of the Sunnis. Who else has a Sunni problem in his country? Vladimir Putin. Mentioned this many times. Statistics that I saw in foreign policy are 25% of Moscow is Sunni Muslim. A large chunk of the Russian armed forces is said to be within less than a decade now will be over 50% Muslim. Putin's thinking about that. How do I keep these people off my back? I mean, he's not stupid. The Syrian regime suspected chemical attack. This is weapons attack from Defense One. On Saturday in Douma, a suburb of Damascus, suggests that Assad and his allies have accomplished many of their primary war aims and are now seeking to secure their hegemony in the Levant. But 2 major factors still complicate Assad's plan. So look, I'm only suggesting this. I'm not suggesting this is the gospel truth. But this is only in response to all the questions that I saw asked this week. Well, why would Assad gas his own people? I don't know. Ask, if you can catch him while he's out driving around. And look, there are people that love Assad in Syria. I acknowledge that. They think he's great. But he had a rebellion that came up in 2011. There was a severe drought. Prices went up. And the people in that area are taxed heavily. And they got upset and they rebelled. And so there's a broad spectrum. There are good Sunni people, there are sort of the rebel groups, and then there are the terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, Nusra Front, and ISIS. Really bad people that we all want to get rid of, even Assad. So part of it is understandable. He's trying to keep his country together. But, the country's kind of cobbled together, and it was always probably going to end up this way, I think. One is Syria's population reason, which to this day includes rebels who will fight to the death, and civilians who nonviolently but fundamentally reject his violent totalitarian rule. The second is President Donald Trump, who has expressed a determination to pull out of Syria entirely, but at the same time has demonstrated a revulsion at Assad's use of chemical weapons. Assad has already unraveled the global taboo against chemical weapons. This is what their explanation of what he's thinking. In the process, exposing the incoherence of the international community. Syria has exposed the international liberal order as a convenient illusion. Western bromides have never again meant nothing when a determined dictator with heavy international backers, who? Iran, who? Russia, who got a bunch of cash from the American government? Iran. Yeah, they used it to build hospitals and schools in Iran? I don't think so. So why now? This latest attack in Ghouta, if it holds to the pattern, makes perfect sense in the calculus of Assad, Vladimir Putin, and Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The successful trio wants first and foremost to subdue the remaining rebels in Syria. There's still some people living there, so there's stragglers. What do you do with stragglers? I mean, they've been bombed into submission. They haven't left yet. The successful trio wants first and foremost to subdue the remaining rebels in Syria with an eye towards several million people remaining in rebel-held Idlib province. A particularly heinous death for the holdouts in Ghouta, according to this military logic, might discourage the rebels in Idlib from fighting to the bitter end. Equally important, however, is the desire to corral Trump, as Syria, Russia, and Iran did to his predecessor, Barack Obama. More about that in just a moment. The one result of the Trump's confusing Syria policy is that Assad and his backers can't quite be sure what America is planning, a pullout or a pushback. Hence, another chemical attack which will test the range of America's response and perhaps will paint Trump into the same corner where Obama's Syria policy languished. For Assad, there is utility in such a feint and no real risk. And so what did we do? We bombed. The reports were that, at least what I've seen, is that the Russians were told, for days they were told, we're going to get you, coming after your chemical sites, and they bombed these buildings, which I believe were largely empty. Assad has learned his lessons since 2013. By the way, his father gassed 30,000 of his people. Oh yeah, and the other thing is, why would Assad do this to his own people? That's the question. Quote, his own people. It's the wrong question. He doesn't consider them his own people. You need to understand that. That's the simple answer to the question. You're asking the wrong question, in my opinion. Now, the question is, how do we respond to that? Do we go in? That's open for debate. I think it's a quagmire, myself. I think it's part of what's going to trigger some of these wars of the end times. America remains in strategic drift, unsure of why it continues to engage in the Middle East and prone to spasms of hyperactivity rather than sustained attention. I agree with this. Jonathan Spire, who I have tremendous respect for. Go follow him on Twitter, follow him on Facebook. He is one of the more thoughtful writers. He's got a book out called Syria After the Fall. I think it's $30 on Kindle because it's published by an academic publisher. And I guess they figure the people that will buy it have student loans and that they're never going to have to pay off or something. I don't know. But I've heard him talk about it. I have not read the book, I will confess to you. I'm going to read it. And he said this today. He is from Britain. He's Jewish. He lives in Jerusalem. He has spent a lot of time in Syria. He understands what's going on in Syria. There are people that have been treated for chemical attacks. They're not all fake. They're not all staged. I will confess my belief that some of them are. And some of them are done by the rebels. These chemicals are not hard to make up. And so we attacked, and now, we destroyed these sites. And as I said to my wife on the way, I guess, Assad is going to have trouble finding chlorine for his pool for a little bit, but it's not that hard to make. And it appears that if the reports are this attack was a chlorine gas attack in large part. And so I guess the response was the president tweeted, mission accomplished, did he not? Okay. You think Assad or Putin are going to change their behavior at all? Personally, you know what I think they're going to do? They're going to escalate things. Now, how soon, I don't know. I personally think it's going to be over the next period of 5 to 6 months. So that's, in my view, the high watch time for Russia doing things. Let me just ask this. So Putin comes out and he does this speech in front of his parliament, and he plays the video of all of his new nuclear weapons, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, things that fly at Mach 10. We don't have anything that can shoot them down. We can't shoot down an ICBM. You can shoot an ICBM down maybe in mid-flight and maybe at the point near termination, which means it's about ready to hit. That's when you can get it. And they have hypersonic weapons now. Now, some of them haven't done too well in testing, but they're developing them. I think they're further down the road than we are. And these things fly at Mach 10. We don't have anything that will stop this. And my concern is that when our ships get there, the fleet that's on its way, the aircraft carrier group, I think it's the Truman, that he's seen the response to the chemical weapons, right? So how about a tactical nuke, which they have and we don't, to take out a nuclear aircraft carrier group? How are we going to respond to that? What are we going to do to respond to that? Well, then you are into, I talked about this last week, global thermonuclear war. Because we really only can respond with ICBMs. Do you think Putin's going to sit there and do nothing if we launch ICBMs at Russia? So I think it's still very tense. And the rhetoric on their side is, on the Russian side, is to escalate this. So this is a great blog post today. It was published yesterday by Adina Kudnicki, a Zionist and conservative blog. I don't know if I can post it on my Facebook page because it was taken down and blocked by Facebook when he posted it. So go to his, type his name in Google and go to his blog. And here's the title of the post: Blowback. Obama's shield to Islamic regimes primed to erupt. Homeland Entity Report, April 2018. And what is, and I just got this before I came in here, so I read through it very quickly. So I'm going to give you my summary from a quick read through. What does he say? He says that a lot of this problem we have now was set up by Obama. What have I been saying all along? This is why I like it, because I like it when people agree with me, or I find some support for it, so I'm not hanging out there all along. And my question is, look, Obama triggered all of this with that speech in Cairo in June of 2009. And I know you attended the Bible study, the church I was doing it at the time. I talked about that speech that Sunday. And I know of one other pastor that did, Jack Hibbs. And in his discussion of that speech, he interviewed Amir Sarfati. And as far as I know, there weren't many other people talking about it. It was incredibly significant. It was what led to the Arab Spring a year and a half later, roughly. Well, a year and a half. Started in Tunisia. And it was, and so I've often said I could never figure out whether Obama was a tool of the Saudis or the Muslim Brotherhood or the Russians. Because when you look at what his career was and his legacy, what did he ever do that did not advance the interest of Russia? Can you give me an answer, please? Syria was allowed to deteriorate. Who stepped into the void? Russia. Who else stepped into the void? Iran. Did Obama do anything to help Iran? Yeah, he did. So here's the conclusion of this article. Don't have time to. The only remaining question is, this go round, after 2 world wars, how many millions of innocents will have to die? But this time due to Hussein Obama's wildfires ignited for the benefit of Islamic regimes and his red ally Putin. It's a question very few will ask, and remember I've talked about the Red-Green Alliance? And so I do think this plays into this final beast empire that's coming. So the response to some of this was the Russian stock market had a big nosedive. Again, I mentioned Jonathan Spire. You should go. I talked about this back in November when it came up. So the Sunday after November 18th, I think I talked about this land bridge that's being built now, I think exists, from Iran to the Golan. And Jonathan Spire wrote a very good article about this. And I'm trying to remember where that article was. Well, I don't have time to go through it. So the response was, the newspapers were filled with this gas attack, what had happened. It was criticized as heinous. And so then this was the headlines in the Times of London the other day. Biggest task force since Iraq on course for Syria. Showing, I think, a picture of the Truman on the front page. And so we know that Friday night this missile attack was launched. I've heard 160 cruise missiles. This is a little video on the right there of some of the missiles hitting in Damascus, attacking a scientific research facility. Which, and I don't know if I should mention this or not, I have to well, if I had a coin, I would toss it. Quick research shared with me this morning indicates that this scientific research facility in Damascus has ties to an international agency on whom the board consists and includes members like Ted Turner, Warren Buffett, and Edmund G. Brown, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, among others. So this is the site that was attacked in Syria. I think 6 or 8 attack sites. The Israeli attacks were on a base to the east of Homs there in the middle of Syria that they engaged in earlier in the week. So, this is President Trump this morning, or yesterday, tweeting yesterday morning, Israel fully supports what we did. They haven't really had a lot to say. This is from the Times of Israel this morning, a satellite photograph showing before and after of the attacks. Here's my usual weekly slide of Hebron and my disclaimer that I'll get to that next week for sure. So, what does this mean prophetically? It's not the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but I think it is showing the alignment of the nations that is predicted in a number of scriptures. Things that will happen in the end times. Of course, we know Ezekiel 38 and 39. And then Isaiah 17. Just so you know, this is the land of Israel. This is the tribal division of the land of Israel. I will be focusing. There are two main tribes that I think you should learn. This is the tribe of Manasseh, is this purple area here. It includes Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle stood. Manasseh was one of the sons of Joseph. And I'm sorry, it includes Shechem. I'm sorry. It includes Shechem, and that's where Joseph's tomb is. So it's no surprise that Joseph was buried in the tribal area that his son was given when they came into the land. And then there is also, of course, this big yellow area is Judah. Simeon had area in the middle here. This is Benjamin. This is Ephraim, or Ephraim, depending on whoever is mispronouncing it. And Ephraim is where Shiloh is. There's Judah, there's Benjamin. By the way, in Benjamin, I mentioned this, we'll talk more about this. It's a fascinating thing in Jerusalem. A lot of people don't even know about Gibeah. This is the homeland, the place where Saul was from. And today you go there and this building stands on top of Gibeah, one of the most prominent high places around Jerusalem. And that's the palace of King Hussein. It was being built in 1967. They had the Six-Day War, and they stopped. And it's 50 years later, now 51 years, it's still standing there. And a lot, it's always interesting how these things go. It's like, well, how did they lose the location of that? And the answer is because people don't study history, right? So there's this thing that's been up there for 50 years, and people just like, well, if they're ever going to finish that building, I wonder what that is. And when you study it, Hussein was building his palace there. Why? Because the first king of Israel I'm on top of him. I built on top of his homeland, his home, because I'm in charge now. That's what the message is that's being sent in that culture. Ephraim, Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood. The tabernacle was in this area over here. And 3 years ago, in 2015, archaeologists, we found Shiloh Tabernacle. The findings to be displayed this week include hewn holes in which wooden beams could have been placed. And Pam and I were there last May, and we stood there, and you can see the places where they put the beams to hold up the tent, the tabernacle. But it's an important site because the prophet Jeremiah prophesied, Jeremiah 17, I shall do to the house which bears my name, in which you trust, and to the place which I gave you and your ancestors, talking about the temple in Jerusalem. And he concludes in Jeremiah 7:14, just what I did to Shiloh. Shiloh was destroyed. It was attacked by the Philistines, the tabernacle done away with. But it had been there for almost 400 years. And Jeremiah came in, he used an object lesson. Jeremiah would have used PowerPoint, trust me. He would have said, this is where the tabernacle used to be, and God's going to do unless you repent and change, God's going to do to the temple what he allowed to have done in Shiloh. Pretty good object lesson. So, Ephraim. The Isaiah 17, and this is usually, when we talk about this is usually where we stop. The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And a lot of it already is a ruinous heap. But it's still a city. The areas that Assad controls are still very lovely, nice parklands, all of the things. Very normal life there. But there's other verses. The cities of Aroer are forsaken. They shall be for flocks which lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Now, if this is a prophecy about the end times, it's part of a whole piece, and I think it is. And there are people that dispute that. I think Mark Hitchcock thinks that this has already been fulfilled, and he's a pretty good Bible teacher. But the cities of Aroer, there's some questions where I think that's in the region around Damascus. And I've shown you pictures and drones the last few weeks of destroyed cities around there. And what does this passage say? The cities of Aroer, in part of this destruction of Damascus, it will say the cities of Aroer are forsaken. And you go through these cities now, there's still some stragglers. They're empty. Over half of the Syrian people don't live where they lived 7 years ago. 10.5 million people. Columbus area, what do we got? So let's say 2 million people in the metro area. Do you think 1 million people being gone 7 years from now would be noticed by people? People would be wondering what's going on. Then there's this passage about Ephraim. The fortress shall also cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, the remnant of Syria, they shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. They're going to be taken. Now, the question is, what's the fortress of Ephraim? I believe, had some talks with some friends about this, I believe that Ephraim Ephraim often referred to the whole northern kingdom because it was sort of like the lead tribe of the northern kingdom of Israel. But what's this whole area up through here? Today, this whole area. It's called what? The West Bank. The capital lies like here's Bethel. So it's like on this, and then Ramallah is like right here. I personally think that things are happening over there. There's a problem, and I think at some point Israel's going to deal with it. That's what I think. And that's why people are trying to make peace. I hope there's peace, but I also know what the Scripture says is going to happen too. So I think that in conjunction with the destruction of Damascus, could this also area be destroyed? I mean, are there any tensions right now between the people in the West Bank and Israel? I mean, it's sort of like the obvious question. I had a tax professor once, and he asked somebody a question, and like, if I make $1 and I'm taxed 40%, I love this professor, as long as he wasn't questioning me. It was entertaining as long as he was doing somebody else. And he said, if I make $1 and I'm taxed at 40%, how much tax do I pay? To which somebody said, well, professor, if you only made $1, you would never be in the 40% tax bracket. To which the professor said, do you understand the concept of a hypothetical question? And they're my facts. Then he asked a female classmate of mine, and she said, well, 39 cents. And the professor's like, ma'am, it's like, who's buried in Grant's tomb? So the question that, is there a conflict now between Israel and these people, is like, who's buried in Grant's tomb, right? It's pretty simple. In Zechariah chapter 9, talking about the oracle of Damascus, the burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach, and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, when the eyes of man, as all the tribes of Israel, shall be toward the Lord. Then it talks about Tyre and Sidon, which is where? Southern Lebanon. Is there a conflict right now between Israel and southern Lebanon? Yes. Now, have these prophecies been fulfilled yet? No. But my point is, they are being aligned to be fulfilled in what could be very short order. Here's this question. Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful. Zechariah 9, verse 5. And Ekron. And the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. Now my question is, so let's go down to Gaza, and ask the question is, does Israel have any problems with Gaza today? Yeah. Do you know what this is? This is a picture from a huge article done this week in the New York Times about this very subject. Gaza. They just found the largest, longest, deepest tunnel in the northern Gaza Strip that they just destroyed just within the last couple of days, the last 48 hours. And it's where a lot of these protests were taking place. So here's this picture, the graphic of the map and the picture of looking from Gaza over to Israel, and you see the tires burning. This is an IED that was put on the border fence. And by the way, I think this is in Texas, by the way. Somebody just put it up for illustration purposes, so don't. But you know that Gaza was complaining this week. Why? The Ministry of Transportation in Gaza was upset. They're having a shortage of tires in Gaza now, and Israel's restricting the import of them. It's sort of like the Menendez brothers' defense. We killed our parents, Judge, and you should have mercy on us because we're orphans. Okay? It's called the Menendez defense. This is, you see them carrying the injured people off on stretchers. These are photographs that are coming from, yeah, they are. Happens all the time. The Palestinian journalist, what flag is he being buried in? That's the Hamas flag. This is the Hamas contingent with a memorial to this journalist. Now, Daniel, just let me say I'll finish up in about 3 minutes here. There are about 18 teachings out of this passage, out of the stuff I've talked about today, I think. Daniel chapter 11, and this is where I think it might be significant from a prophetic standpoint, from a prophetic foreshadowing standpoint, what's going on. And there's a dispute about Daniel 11. A lot of people think that Daniel 11 up to verse 36 is history, prophecy fulfilled in history. It was a prophecy when it was given. It was fulfilled under the different kingdoms that came, and Antiochus Epiphanes, or Epiphanes, however you want to mispronounce it, who committed the abomination of desolation at the time of the Maccabees, led to the Maccabean revolt, desecrated the temple. So a lot of people say, well, that the first 35 verses of Daniel are history, of prophecy that's already been fulfilled. And then the only thing that needs to be fulfilled then is 36 through 45. It talks about the Antichrist. The question is, what about these? I think the whole thing might be a prophecy. Some of it's been fulfilled. We know prophecy's been fulfilled. But the 21 through 35, I think, relates in a large part towards the coming Antichrist. And we know from Scripture, for example, in Daniel chapter 2, we have this, the statue, this stone cut out without hands hits the statue and it collapses. And we have a tendency to say, well, these first four kingdoms are all history, and they have nothing to do with prophecy. But it says, in the days of these kings that have just been described in the statue, the days of these kings, shall the God of heaven set up a new kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. That's not been fulfilled yet. So you understand it's difficult, and there's a lot of controversy out there, and that's why I tend try not to be too dogmatic on when we go through these prophetic scriptures saying, oh, well, that could never happen. That would never happen. Israel would never have anything. They would never, follow after an Islamic guy, right? If people all over the place in our country, too, falling all over this Saudi crown prince. Can't happen? Okay. It is happening. How about that? So, but, we'll see how this, I think we'll see how this unfolds. In, let's see, there was also one other verse that I wanted to read. Well, there's a passage, I think I took the slide out and forgot to put it back in. Give me 1 second here. We're almost done, but Daniel chapter 8. Okay, I have the wrong reference on here. I apologize. It's Daniel chapter 8, verse 19. This is the ram, the goat vision, comes from the west. It's, there's this battle. A lot of people say, well, that's, that happened back at this time. But in the middle of the passage, it says, and he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. And so a number of us think, this Daniel chapter 8 is not fulfilled yet. It's still something to come, so we need to be looking at that, and we could go into that quite a bit. But I just want to say this. In this passage about Daniel, this is where I think it's foreshadowing. It talks about the fact that the Antichrist, and Jesus makes reference to, when you see the abomination, in Matthew chapter 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, flee, right? So you go to these passages, and the abomination of desolation is talked about in Daniel verse 31. And I think it's clearly a reference to the Antichrist. It's quoted again in Daniel chapter 12. It's tied to the last 3.5 years of the 70th week of Daniel. I think there it talks about 1,290 days. So, but what it talks about in Daniel chapter, hang on here, verse 30, just before the abomination of desolation. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and returned and have indignation against the holy covenant. So he shall do, he shall ever even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Now, I don't think this was fulfilled. I want you to understand that. But I just think are things set up so that this could happen? Because Chittim was where? Relative to the land of Israel. And north of Israel is Syria. Where was Chittim? Chittim was to the west, right? And so what did we see? I showed you earlier, the headline. Biggest task force since Iraq on course for Syria. And then this graphic, I don't remember where I got it from. What do you see? Ships coming from the west against this area. So I'm only saying is that it certainly is a time to be aware of these passages, because we do see things speeding up. So really what we need to do, there's more indication that, like my friend going to Iraq and the Kurdish areas, sharing the gospel, we need to be doing more of that. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for your prophecy. Pray that you'll be with us this week and that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel. And we pray, Lord, that your Son will return and bring peace to the earth that it so desperately desires and needs. In Jesus' name, amen.